I'm able to, once I got this chucked up in the vise here, vacuum cleaner belt like what I always use, I'm able to adjust this a little bit. Once it's on there, I can move it how I need to. Now, to check my alignment, I've taken the base of this roll pin punch, the smooth unknurled part, and I tapped it in because it's just the exact size. And the pin itself is supposed to align this. And so I tapped it in there just to make sure, and I've checked my center line and it is lined up. So now I'm going to tap this back out and put it together. Alright. We've got to get in here, and my suggestion for this, notice the barrel's not on yet. This pin has just been stuck in there by hand. My suggestion is to take some pliers, some needle nose or something like that, and you just want to fit that down into that slot. That pin has got to go through the hole right there, and it will go down in here into that slot, and that's its home. Now what I recommend is to get it in there and then tap this pin in a little bit. You heard it hit that plate. Now, once we've hit that plate, we can use our pliers to adjust that plate in there until the pin is over its hole. We can tap it a little bit. What I'm doing is I'm putting a little bit of pressure on the side of it, and with that pin, and that helps hold it. There we go. Now we'll tap that on home. This is actually what it's called, is the ejector trip. I guess it's what actually catches the ejector and then releases it. So what I'm going to do is put a dab of retaining thread locker on the back side. I would do that if my Loctite would flow. See if I can get you guys zoomed in here where you can see what I'm doing. Let that flow in there. And of course it's going to push it right back out the other side. And now the reason that got hard to tap is because if you remember, those pins are knurled on the side there. Get a little focus here. There we go. There we go. Now it's a good idea. Make sure that your ejector trip will move and you're good there. This is your basic parts on your Ithaca. You've got 3 springs here that are all the same. One of them is a bolt spring, the other one's the ejector spring, the other one is the ejector trip spring. And they're all the same spring, same part number. In your pins over here, the only pin and the only part that is not shown is the ejector trip right here that's in there already, and its pin. its pin was the longest and the skinniest. The other pins here, this one's actually the ejector. This next pin is your trigger pin. And remember, all these pins are knurled or notched on one end. So there's your trigger. Then you're going to have a hammer pin, and your barrel pin, or the pin that will go right here, are the same. And then there's one that's a little bit shorter than those two, and that one is the pin for your cocking lever. There's your, basically your bolt or bolt carrier. All it does is cantilevers. It's a single shot, you load it each time. So hammer, pretty straightforward and simple. What we're going to do is install this, and of course I've dressed this down and dressed this pretty good. Don't worry too much about getting it all lined up whenever you go to put this back in. Make sure that your trip is out of the way, and just wiggle it in and wiggle it on. Get y'all over here where you can see a little better. There we go. Just then, as I put it on, I noticed that right, let's see here, let me get it where you can see, right in there, where the top of that shell catch, or the ejector catch is, it wasn't clearing the area that I've dressed up down here. Of course, I had nothing to go by, so obviously there must have been a little bit of a flat spot on the bottom of this section. So I'm going to get a file and put a little bit of a flat spot on there, just enough to allow that to clear. I'm going to do a little bit of extra dressing on this. And notice I'm filing back and forth with this file instead of just in one motion. That's because it's a diamond file, and you don't have to file only in one direction with these files. Let's check and see if it's got enough clearance now. Looks like we got a little bit left to do. had to do some pretty good notching on it there, but that's what it's taken. And again, we'll go back here. Now don't worry so much about it being 100% straight. What you want to do is, and I'm just putting this in by hand here, you're going to run that down, and once you get it in, you look through that main hole and you're going to see if it's deep enough or not. See, now you can see at the very top of that hole, see how it's not an actual circle now? The part of that barrel's in the way. Now if I go and I push that back, there. Now you know you've got it set straight. Now whenever you put that pin in, that pin is going, it should align and clock that barrel properly. But before you put the pin in, you've got to get your ejector in. Alright, for this next section here, what we've got to do is we're going to get our ejector spring, and main barrel pin all in. And what the catch there is that the pin actually goes right into this notch right here. So we've got to get our spring in, and then we've got to get our ejector in, and then comes the barrel pin. So down in there, we're going to install our spring. Drop it right down in there. And then next, we're going to install our ejector. And it's going to go with these notches here down. Make sure you're not sticking it into the breech there, into the chamber. So now, with that being done, okay, you see through the barrel pin hole. See what we can get to push on our ejector. We need to get our ejector pushed all the way into its home. And then the barrel pin will go in. Said it would go in. There we go. There's the barrel pin. And now, the barrel pin has to go in. Remember we talked about the splined side right here? It's going to go in from the right hand side. Go. Now, it is not in all the way. What I did was I took my brass punch and I put it in on the ejector and I pushed in. Now, here's something I want to make very, very clear. Whenever I did this, you can see from here, I didn't push from an angle and forward and down because I don't want to snap that ejector off. I got this back as far as I could, and I put the end of the ejector, say that's this right here, instead of putting it right here where it would have been easier to just push in, that would have possibly broken it off, or could have. So I got it down here where I was kind of pushing up at the same time. Kind of up instead of down. And that way I didn't run the risk of breaking it off. Once you get it, the farther in you get it pushed, the less chance of breaking it off because it's supported by being into its slot there. And once you get it pressed in pretty much all the way, then you can get your pin mashed in and tapped in. Now, once it's into here, you notice that the ejector is retained somewhat. It's in some. It's not caught, or it's captive by that. So we're good there. So now it's time to go ahead and we're going to insert that all the way. Go ahead and make sure that your ejector does move, and we want to stake it. Make sure that we're good on both sides. Now, I will go back in after that and I'll put a little bit of wicking grade Loctite on there. But for now, whenever I'm not 100% sure that it may not have to come back apart, we're going to leave it the way that it is. It's a good idea at this point in time to check alignment. And it appears that we're a little off center. If you look down in there, you see the ejector and the sight and everything, and maybe it's an optical illusion, but it appears we're a little off center. I'm gonna try and redo the camera angle here, and we'll see if we can check that. Alright, we are now looking at it here, and we're fairly straight. And so I'm going to run a little bit of the wicking grade Loctite right there. Let it wick in. That'll secure it really well. If you have something like a screw that you know you've got oils and greases on, it's a good idea to take some brake parts cleaner, and you can just take it on a little towel or something and just give it a little squirt. Doesn't take much, just enough to get those oils and greases off of there before you Loctite. I want to address a part that I failed to recognize was even there. I didn't look and see it on the schematic. You may or may not. If you look down inside of there, there actually is a plunger in there that I missed. And it's not, I'm not able to dig it out this way. With the barrel out, I would have been able to push it through. But either way, it's in there, and what it does is this spring goes in and it pushes it up into the ejector trip. And what spurred me to look for it was I realized that spring couldn't be on the ejector trip by itself. And so either way, that thing was in there pretty well. It is moving though. I am able to move it, so it is free and clear. It's not frozen up or anything, but it's there. I just wanted to call myself on my mistake and make it right. So either way, that'll be in there. Now you take another one of these springs. Remember I told you there were 3 of these springs that are like springs. They're all the same. Spring will go down in there and it will fit down into that plunger that's there. And then your screw that we cleaned. And I'm going to use a little bit of red thread lock. Doesn't have to be much, especially whenever you know that you've got it cleaned off and free of oils. Remember, I like to spin it backwards until I feel it or hear it click down into its threads. Having a problem feeling it, so I'm going to do it by hand. should be able to look down in here and see if your ejector or your ejector trip is raised or not. Right in here is what we're looking at. Right here. Now, you see I can actually fit my scribe underneath there, whereas before I couldn't. It's got it raised so it can trip it and catch your ejector. And see, make sure that everything is working and functioning properly. Take your ejector there, press it in and see if it locks. You hear it click, it locked, and now you notice this trip is even higher. And if you press the trip, it should release the ejector. We'll do it again and watch the trip down there. See it click up. We will press it down and the ejector pops out. And it's not supposed to throw it out of the gun. It's supposed to bring it out of the chamber so you can grab it by hand and flick it out of there. You notice right here, that's underneath the barrel. That is a lubrication spot for your ejector. You can pull your forearm off and that lets you get to the back side where the spring and everything is, where you can drop some oil down in there and lubricate it. A little bit of oil down there, wipe it off, turn it around, wipe it off in here, and your ejector is lubricated. Next I'm going to put the trigger in. It's very, very simple. Remember, on this you've got your spline side right there. Right here is our trigger pinhole. Come right up from there. There we go. There we go. Alright. Brass punch. There we go. Get it at the right angle. Make sure that it's free and clear. These are blocks from my daughter's foam block set. They work great. Now, we're going to do our cocking lever next. For the next step, you got to put in your this piece here. What you're going to do, it actually is going to protrude down through there. It sits in there like that, and it's got to be put in before you put your bolt in. So the easiest way to go about it is just get the tail in and just get it started, and you should be able to get it to drop right in case you didn't see that. It is going to, if you've got any questions about which way it goes, if you'll take your hammer, it touches the hammer like that. So get the tail started down in there and let it drop into place. You'll put the firing pin in your bolt You're going to need that pin and that spring. This is the smallest of all the springs that are in there. And your firing pin. Go ahead and put the firing pin in. Now, put the retention pin in. Move your firing pin all the way to the rearward position, and then your spring is going to go in there. You don't have to use a scribe, you can use your fingers to put it in there. Just compress it down, and there you go. Actually, my pin fell out. I'll pull it back out of there. There you go. I'm going to hold my fingers there on it. And once you install this down in here, the receiver itself will keep that from coming loose. Here's what I was talking about. When you drop this down in there, the receiver itself will keep the spring and your pin in place. You want to make sure that you do before you install your bolt is make sure your ejector is pressed and locked forward. Be able to push it forward and you'll hear it click. Now we're going to put our pin in, get some lubrication on it. Your recess here is going to go on the right hand side. Slide it down in there. If you need to, you might have to take a scribe and hook the back of your bolt to get it moved into place. And don't forget to have your extractor in the depressed forward position locked in there before you do this. Next, what we're going to do, you've got your detent and the third and last like spring like the other ones. You're going to put them right down in that hole, and that hole's in the pin that you just put in. I mean, it goes into the pin that you just put in. Don't lose your spring in there. Now that spring will go all the way down in there. It should not protrude. Take your detent with a rounded end. The rounded end needs to be out or facing towards the bottom. Go, just like that. Next, you can install cocking lever. And the two pins you'll have left, you'll have a longer one and a shorter one. You're going to be using the shorter one, the one that's going to have the wear marks on it from that cocking lever. Put a little bit of lube right in here in this little crab's claw. Put a little bit of lube into the pinhole. Now this is going to go right over the area down there in that detent, the bottom part of the bolt. remember that pin, it's got splines on one side. Those splines go in, it'll go in from the right hand side. So the splines will be here, the narrow end goes in first. While you all may not be morons, I'm sure there's a moron or two out there that needs to hear that. I'm guilty of that sometimes. Make sure that it's able to move. Make sure you don't have it sticking out too far on either side. And you're done with that part. Put the hammer in. We went ahead and put this piece in earlier. If it falls out while you're doing this stuff, it's not the end of the world. You can still install it with all this being like there. Remember, that part goes, this part goes to the top. Just get your tail in there. Let it fall down. For your hammer and the hammer pin, that's the only pin you've got left. Make sure that you've got the hole there lubed, all this area lubricated. You don't want a lot of lube where the sear or the trigger lockup area is, but a little bit won't hurt. You've got to hook this down underneath the piece that we just put in. So it's going to go forward and then bring it back to hook up underneath there. Now once you've done that, you can look down in here. You may have to move the trigger forward a little bit or backwards. I had to move the trigger backwards just a little bit to get it lined up. On your pin, same deal, splined on one side. If you're this far into the video, you know that from all the other pins. I don't have to continue to tell you which side to put it in through. There we go. That was articulating the hammer, the trigger, and the pin at once. No hammering there, just part of the pun. Make sure that it moves before I go any farther with that. Make sure that that is engaged properly. Hammer does work. Get on to the next part. Mainspring in. You've got your mainspring housing, your mainspring, and this lock washer. Go ahead and get a little bit of lubrication down into the mainspring hole. You don't want it completely saturated, but you want to make sure that it's not going to run dry. There we go. You got your hammer plunger, it's right down there. This lock washer goes around that hammer plunger. And it sure does help if your tooling is not magnetized. Alright. With your spring in, go ahead and start tightening this. And it should funnel that hammer plunger straight into where it needs to be. Should be able to do that hand tight. And whatever you're using, I've got a vacuum cleaner belt here. Just make sure you get it on the German torque scale. Guden tight is how tight it needs to be. That's a technical term that you can find in any gunsmith catalog. Guden tight, German torque. It'll be under G. If you get this, start to get it back together, notice the ejector is depressed there, but it's still sticking out just a little bit. You get everything put back together and get your bolt in, and your bolt will not go down. It's because it's hitting that ejector, and we'll need to adjust for that ejector. Here, after I've finished with the modifications to the ejector, you can see there I had to try and zoom in here a little bit so you guys can see. Had to take it and right here on this top edge I had to bevel it, and I had to bevel the bottom some. I'll give you guys a top view. Of course, this has all been re-blued now. You can see where it's got a little bit of a bevel on it, and that allows, whenever your bolt comes down, what the deal is the top portion right there, that has to be beveled, so whenever this bolt cantilevers down, this right here can push it down and make sure that it's pushed in out of the way as it goes down. When this goes down, it hits the trip, and the ejector comes out and throws your round out. Well, then the next section down here, the step that protrudes farther on the bottom, that has to be able to catch right here. And this, whenever this cantilever's back up, it has to slide on that, and this actually pushes it back into its catch. And so that's got to have that step. So that step is what allows it to get pushed back in that last little bit so it catches the trip. We're going to put our false magazine on, and I've gone ahead and coated everything, all the wood and all the metal and everything, with frog lube. That's why it looks shinier now than what it was. And frog lube's real good about soaking in to wood that's dried out, and it helps rejuvenate it. It's a good thing to rub it in. You'll put a couple of applications on, and it'll soak it up. A little bit of heat, like putting it underneath a heat lamp, not where it gets hot, just where it's warm, does real good. Or just rub it a lot with your hands and warm it up with your hands. It'll soak in and does a great job. Alright, I've already lubricated this. That's the lubrication hole there. That is your that's your ejector latch. Basically the way this is going to go on, I didn't remove this. It's got a grub screw there. Just very, very simple and easy. This little lug fits into here and locks it in. That's going to go over your barrel. Once you have it there, make sure that you're up push tight on that, you're going to run this down. I'm going to go ahead and back it up so I can put a little Loctite on it. I am using red Loctite. You know, it's blue Loctite will work. Just something to keep it seized up. And remember to keep pressure back. It should be pretty much self-aligning. We'll check it though. If you want to, you can put it up like this. I'm pulling down on that while I tighten. You can do that if you want to. Just make sure that you've got that seam closed up. You want that good and tight. I mean, tighten it good. Not so tight, you strip it out, of course. Now, we've got this band. Now, I've not used any frog lube on this. This is just a piece of plastic, actually. But frog lube works really well on plastic. You can just rub it on, brush it on, whatever you want to do. And it'll rejuvenate the plastic as well. Run that over. You've got a hole right there that goes into, and just like with all of the wood that I put screws back into, I always put a dab of wood glue in there. What I'm going to use this time is Hot Stuff instant glue. This is some phenomenal stuff. Guess it'd help if I had my screwdrivers. And that hot stuff can be used for filling cracks. It can be used for all different types of applications. Alright. Get our stock on here. It's going to just fit straight in there. This is, you know, straightforward, easy stuff. I prefer Loctite on this one. You can put a liberal amount on this one because the threads are pretty sturdy, they're pretty heavy, and you can use a socket on it instead of just a screwdriver. And the other thing is that it's, however tight this bolt is directly responsible for how straight the stock is, because it goes in, it kind of V's here, and so it absolutely is imperative that it's very tight to get it to be straight. So on this one, it doesn't hurt to put a little extra Loctite on it and go ahead and use that socket to make sure that you've got it tight. Get it to start threading. It's not wanting to. Try again here. Might have to turn it up so that will lead straight in. Let's see, I tell you what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to try and start it with a screwdriver because I'm thinking that maybe my socket is not allowing it's not actually pushing the bolt up in there because I've got a deep well socket. So we'll try and start it. There we go, that's what it was. Start it with a screwdriver and then I'll finish it with a socket wrench. Ratchet. Go ahead and double check. So since this, I used that hot glue, hot stuff, because I wanted to make sure that little barrel band couldn't slip. So for the buttstock, we're just going to go to the old tried and true method of putting a drop of wood glue into the screw holes. Let that get down in there a little bit, and it's okay if you get excess because that'll just help keep your buttstock centered up and on there. And this is a different screwdriver than the one I use for the barrel band. This is a larger screwdriver because they're a little bit larger headed screws. Just snug that first one up, get them both started, run one of them down to where it touches and then do the other one. That way they're centered and tight. We assume they're centered here. We'll need to check. Yep, and it is. And that is the Ithaca 22 single. We'll try out the little Ithaca here. Make sure that everything's functioning properly. As it is. There we go. I always like to run a few of them just to make sure. One more. It's starting to rain out here.